Hello again. So this is my first lecture, which I will focus, it'll be a brief one, and I'll focus primarily on some of the theoretical aspects of what Adam Kotsko, the author of Creepiness, is talking about, right? And I had you read an excerpt that involved the Burger King and the ads that ran for a short period of time that were then considered so creepy that they were not successful, right? Creepiness. So I'm going to give you a few, I'll read out a little bit from the book about what he is saying about creepiness, and then then I'd like to talk about what his ideas imply, right, in terms of larger cultural analysis of the moment we're in right now, and a sort of history of the history of aesthetics, right? So Kotsko, in a section called Creepiness and Culture, he says, there's something compelling about creepiness, even something attractive, right? I saw it already in my research. Never once did my questions about creepiness fail to produce animated, impassioned discussion from those I asked. And I also saw it in the response to my public talks and in the frequent exhortations that I had to write this book. We reject and revile creepiness, and at the same time we want it. Then he goes on to talk about what his thesis is, what his goal is, right? And he says, my goal in this book is to figure out why, and my contention is that the ongoing collapse of white, straight male culture, for all its many unappealing qualities, represents a unique opportunity to thoroughly explore the question of creepiness. And why is it attractive? Why do we have what we had referred to in class as grim fascination, right? We talked about grim fascination in the context of horror. What Kotsko is asking us to consider is a sort of cheapened, whitewashed form of horror, right? Which is what he's saying creepiness is, that it does not have the spectacle and the grandeur of horror, but it has some of the qualities, right? The qualities that render the psychosis that we see in the psychotic killers of horror films, that aspect is rendered in a more vanilla, in a more everyday fashion when it comes to the theories, when it comes to the aesthetic of creepiness, right? I just looked at myself on screen and I can see my sunscreen because I had gone out running, and I just came up, cleaned up, and then started talking, but I could see my sunscreen just radiating. Well, I am in front of a blue screen, am I not? So I suppose I'm preventing myself from skin disease, if nothing else. So, with all that is to say, I apologize if I'm shining at you. All right, so returning to the lecture and to matters of seriousness. Kotsko's point is that creepiness is something that is a washed out version, a kind of ordinary version of horror, right? If horror is too much, right, in the Freudian sense, horror is symptomatized by excess, right? There is too much of everything that renders itself horrible. That is why horror exists, because it is a symptom of excess of desire that is misguided, desire that is misplaced, right? And desire that is incapable of being tamed, within social conventions and mores. We had talked about this when we talked about the uncanny, and you might recall that from our class conversations. But here, what is happening is that excess has been tamped down a little bit, just enough for it to pass as almost ordinary, as almost acceptable, as almost normal, right? So think about creepy characters, and Kotsko gives us a whole sense of, he gives us a whole melange of creepy characters, right, from television and popular culture, right? And the king is one of them, and I'll talk about the king in either this lecture or in the next lecture when we talk about the ad and what makes the Burger King particularly creepy to us, right? But be it Dexter, be it any of these serial killer types that we have so many of in popular culture today, right? There were just show after show after show that involves usually creepy men, right? And what Kotsko is saying is that they're usually white creepy men who are of the middle class, right? Who have seemingly okay lives, who are lonely, but not especially lonely, right? Their loneliness is not disturbing for it to be, say, horrible. It can even be a laughable, nearly pathetic isolation that this person enacts, right? But it is almost identifiable, and this is a very important part of the aesthetic of creepiness, that we almost identify with it, right? And the only reason we don't entirely identify with it, or most of us don't entirely identify with it, is the fact that that hint of excess is palpable. We can sense it somehow, right? We might not be able to put our finger on why that particular individual whom we find creepy is creepy, right? We can't particularly say, well, he or she or they are creepy because this, but we say, I can tell that this person is creepy, I just don't know why, right? When it is horror, the excess is so visible, so palpable, and so articulated that our response in horror, our aesthetic response to the excess, is defined. And that's the difference between horror, that which is horrible, and creepiness, that which is creepy. So Kotsko locates creepiness in 20th and 21st century cultural practices, cultural phenomena, and I would argue, I would add to what Kotsko says, I would argue that creepiness is, I think, an aesthetic that is developed in mass isolation. That sounds paradoxical, I know, and it is designed to be that. We are perhaps encouraging and are encouraged to have collective experiences of isolation, right? So social media, we talk about this in another class, but social media is designed to make us feel like the world is at our fingertips, right? I can sit here and chat with my mother, with my nephew, with my friends, and they might be anywhere and everywhere in the world, right? And I can get in touch with them, and it's so lovely. It's false comfort and it's false assurance of global community renders and that this is the, this is the kind of street side critique of social media, it renders us lazy when it comes to literally stepping out and talking with our neighbor. People have been saying this when it comes to a variety of media, so none of this is really new, right? So when people attack current social media and accuse it of having destroyed the social fabric that, unites humanity or whatever, I just want to say bullshit. I'm sorry, for those of you that are watching for the first time or are encountering my lectures for the first time, please know that I swear, not in any particularly gross manner, but I say things like crap and hell and shit. As many of you have heard before in my classes, it is because language is a dirty substance that is ever changing, because it is always trying, often if not always failing, to express us entirely, and all that we wish to express is not sterile or censored. And I think language must be vandalized so that it remains alive, remains alert to our needs, and that's one of the theoretical reasons, I swear. So that was for people who are watching for the first time, but my students should know this about me. And again, it's not like I'm scandalously foul-mouthed. I just use a few peppery words here and there, right? And I apologize if it offends your senses, but it is not designed to offend your intellect, right? So for that, I hope you'll forgive me. Okay, so when people say new media has kind of led to this isolation, I would say that this kind of isolation is designed to exist within media, right? We are always in some or another form communicating in order to avoid feeling isolated. By mass isolation or collective isolation, I mean that now there are media and technologies that are available to us so that we can be alone together, right? So television did that. And we have television characters in shows, on Netflix, on Amazon, on Hulu, right? Shows that represent through main characters now, chief characters, hero type, protagonist type characters, this particular phenomena, right? Of almost ordinary, almost everyday experiences of collective loneliness. We see heroes or protagonists who are almost like us in that they too feel the kind of isolation that we feel, only they are creepy and somehow we're not, right? So Dexter can be creepy. And I think as the show proceeds, and Adam Kotsko talks about this in his book, as the show proceeds, his character becomes creepier and creepier, right? If you've watched the show, and I apologize if this is going to spoil it for you, spoiler alert. As the show proceeds, there are motifs such as incest that kind of creep in to the show that makes Dexter's character and other characters that we might otherwise feel sympathy for a little uncomfortable to go along with, right? That our sympathy seems a little bit complicated when we start thinking about what exactly we're sympathizing with. And that's also part of the aesthetic of creepiness, that it, as the word creep suggests, it is a slow development, right, from amorality to, say, a hesitant morality that renders our appreciation of creepiness to be full, right? So we start out saying, oh, he's such a bang-on great character, he's so funny, he's so witty, blah, blah, blah. after a while we start thinking about what we're sympathizing with. I'm going to stop and move on to the next